My mother-in-law called me worthless at her own Thanksgiving table in front of everyone I loved. Nobody corrected her. Not my husband. Not one single guest. 3 weeks ago I won $12 million, and by Tuesday morning she was on my porch in her Goodwill coat, holding a pie she didn't bake, calling me sweetheart for the first time in 9 years. She had no idea I still had the recording from that dinner. She had no idea what her own husband told me in a parking lot the night everything fell apart. And she had absolutely no idea what I'd already decided to do with her family's hardware store before she ever knocked on my door. Welcome back to Dark Revenge, where the quietest woman in the room usually ends up writing the ending. If stories about family, boundaries, and the kind of justice that never has to raise its voice are why you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and go ahead and click subscribe now, because this one runs the full half hour and every minute of it earns its place. My name is Grace Whitfield. I teach 5th grade in a town most people have never heard of. This is the year my mother-in-law found out exactly what she called worthless. 3 weeks before Diane showed up with that pie, I was sitting in my parked car outside Duffy's quick stop on Route 9, staring at a scratch-off ticket like it might change its mind. I'd bought it on a whim, a $2 treat after a long Tuesday, because it was sitting right there by the register with a $12 million top prize printed across the top. I scratched it with my car key expecting nothing, the way you always expect nothing, and then I sat there 4 full minutes reading the same 6 numbers over and over, waiting for them to rearrange into something less impossible. They didn't. They stayed exactly what they were. I didn't scream or call anyone. I drove home 11 miles under the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, and told Danny after Josie was asleep, with the dishwasher running so the sound would cover my voice shaking. We told 4 people over the next 3 weeks. My friend Renee, my principal, a financial advisor in Indianapolis named Curtis Boone, and Danny's father Roy, because Danny said his dad deserved to know before it hit the papers, and because Roy Whitfield had never once in 9 years made me feel like something the family was still deciding whether to keep. Indiana doesn't let you stay anonymous. Curtis told me that apologetically, like a diagnosis. No trust. No shell company hides you here past $1 million. He said most people find out within a week. It took 9 days. A woman 2 pews behind us at church has a cousin who works in the Lottery Commission's press office, and by Sunday, half the congregation knew before the county paper even ran it. I found out they knew when the produce clerk called me Mrs. Millionaire over a bunch of bananas. And I understood right, then it was only a matter of time before it reached Birchwood Lane. I just didn't think it will take 3 days, and I didn't think she'd bring a pie. She knocked on a Tuesday morning, which should have told me everything, because Diane Whitfield does not do spontaneous. She was on my porch in here a good coat, holding a foil pan with about taped to the lid like shen me to believe she'd made it herself. Grace, honey, she said, and in 9 years of marriage, she had called me Grace exactly as often as required and honey approximately never. I've been thinking about you so much. I just had to come see my girl. My girl. 2 Novembers after telling a full dining room I was worthless, I was suddenly her girl. I let her in because Josie was at school and some stubborn part of me wanted to see how far she'd take it before getting to the point. We sat at my kitchen table, and she talked for 20 minutes about the church fund and Kayla's new kitchen and how proud she'd always secretly been off, in a voice so warm you'd think we'd never had a hard year between us. Then she got to it. The hardware store was in real trouble, she said. The bank had sent a letter. 62 years on Main Street, and some loan officer wanted to talk foreclosure like the building was nothing but a number on a spreadsheet. Family takes care of family, she said, patting my hand like I was the one who needed comforting. That's all this ever was, Grace. Family. I told her I'd think about it, and I meant it, just not the way she wanted. Because I'd already known about that bank letter for 3 weeks, since before I ever scratched that ticket. And I already knew exactly what I was going to do about it, just not the way she thought. To understand why a pie on a Tuesday turned my stomach, you need to understand Fairhaven and what the Whitfield name means inside it. Fairhaven, Indiana sits 40 minutes off the interstate, the kind off town where the water tower wears the high school mascot. Main Street runs 4 blocks, the Wagon Wheel Diner, where the coffee hasn't changed since 1988, First Baptist with its gravel lot, and Whitfield and Sons Hardware, brick and standing since 1962, when Danny's grandfather poured the foundation himself. In a town that size, the Whitfield name carries weight the way old money carries weight in bigger places. Not flashy, just assumed. Diane married into it at 22 and spent 4 decades making sure nobody forgot what it was worth. I grew up an hour south, plainer and smaller, raised by a mother who cleaned offices at night and never once let me think that was something to be ashamed of. I became a teacher because my own 5th grade teacher was the first adult who made my questions feel like they mattered, and I wanted to be that for somebody else. I took a job at Fairhaven Elementary at 24 and met Danny Whitfield 9 months later at outing neither of us wanted to be at, hiding by the same sheet cake. He made me laugh inside 4 minutes. He still can on a bad day. My mother-in-law called me worthless at her own Thanksgiving. I want to be fair to Diane because she was never a cartoon. She grew up with very little, one coat worn 4 winters straight, and married into the Whitfields right as their name started meaning something in that county. I think some part of her never stopped being afraid of that coat, of ever going back to being a girl nobody had to remember. So she built a version of worth that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with what you visibly brought to the table. Kayla married a dentist named Brett 2 years before Josie was born, and Diane introduced him to every soul in that church like a prize she'd personally won. She introduced me as Danny's wife, she teaches. Full stop, like the sentence needed to end right there before anyone got the wrong idea. I never asked the Whitfields for a dime. I brought my own paycheck, my own insurance, and eventually my own daughter, who has Danny's stubborn chin and my mother's exact laugh. I thought that was enough for a long time. I didn't yet understand that in Diane's ledger, showing up with a smaller paycheck instead of a bigger one wasn't neutral. It was a debt running the wrong direction. The small things came first, quiet enough to talk yourself out off noticing. There was the year the local paper came out to take a family portrait on the sidewalk, 3 generations of Whitfields under the old sign. Diane arranged everyone herself, Roy center, Danny and Kayla flanking him, Brett, even Hal the longtime manager. I stood at the edge holding 12-year-old Josie, and Diane said, camera crew waiting, Grace, why didn't you get Josie's picture separately after, so we don't crowd the frame? 6 Whitfields ran in the county paper that Thursday. Not me. There was every birthday for 9 years, a card from Kayla, a card from Roy, nothing from Diane, while Brett's got a cake with his name piped in blue icing every August without fail. There were comments dropped so casually you'd almost miss the blade. Teaching must be so rewarding. At Easter, holding my hand in both of hers, even if it doesn't pay very much. Or, to a cousin at Josie's baptism, not quietly enough, Danny Calvi had his pick. He's always had a soft heart for strays. I let most of it go. I told myself she was old-fashioned, that Danny needed me to be the bigger person. I was good at it. I'd had practice. Then came the Thanksgiving that ended the practice. 2 Novembers ago, Diane's good china out, 12 of us around the table. I'd propped my phone against the bread basket to record Roy telling his story about the flood of '81, the year he slept in the store 6 weeks straight keeping the pipes from freezing, because Josie loved that story, and I wanted her to have it in his real voice someday. Kayla and Brett had just announced a new house on Miller Road, and Diane raised her glass, glowing in a way I'd never once seen her glow for me. To Kayla, who married a man who knows how to take care of a family. Lord knows not every wife in this family understood that assignment. The table went quiet the specific way a room goes quiet when everyone's waiting to see if you'll let something go. I didn't. Tired, worn thin from 9 years of small cuts, I said, "That's a strange thing to say at Thanksgiving, Diane." She set her glass down carefully and looked at me, not angry, just finished pretending. "You want strange? You've been worthless to this family since the day Danny brought you home. A schoolteacher's salary doesn't keep lights on. It never has, and we both know it. I've been polite about it for 9 years, and I'm tired." Nobody moved. Josie, 5, was 2 seats down, stacking green beans on her fork, too busy to understand what her grandmother had just said about her mother, and I remember being grateful for that in the midleaf everything. Roy said Diane, low and sharp, the only time in 9 years I heard him raise his voice at her. Danny said, "Mom, that's Seno," quiet, looking at his plate instead of at me. Nobody said it wasn't true. I didn't cry at that table. I finished the meal. I helped clear plates, because some habits outlast their reasons. I fell apart alone in my own bathroom 20 minutes later with the fan running, so nobody would hear it through the door. Danny found me there. He didn't apologize for his mother, not really. He said she was stressed about the store, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that I knew how she got. I understood, for the first time in our marriage, that being defended a little isn't the same as being defended. Roy caught me by my car before we left. He doesn't say much. Grace, I need you to actually believe this. You have never for one day been worthless in this family. My wife says things when she's scared, and she's been scared about that store longer than you've known Danny. That's not an excuse for her. It's just true. Don't let her rewrite what you are. I drove home, and somewhere in the weeks after, without deciding to, I stopped expecting Christmas cards. The visits thinned on their own, the way a wound scabs over once you stop picking at it. I never told Diane I still had that recording. I'd forgotten it myself for almost a year, until the night I finally watched the whole thing back, just to be sure I hadn't imagined how bad it was. I hadn't. It was worse hearing it again. She sounds so calm. I didn't spend 2 years plotting anything. It would make a better story if I told you I was quietly building a case the whole time. I wasn't. I was just living. I kept teaching. Room 14, Fairhaven Elementary, 5th grade, 11 years by then. I made lead teacher the spring after that Thanksgiving, $91 extra a month, and no additional acknowledgement from Diane that I know of. Josie started kindergarten, and most nights that was the whole of what I thought about before sleep. Her spelling words, whether she'd eaten enough vegetables. Danny and I got better, slowly, through 100 small conversations instead of one big one. He started saying, "My wife's better at her job than most people are at anything," to strangers at the store, unprompted, like he was making up lost time one sentence at a time. He never did go back and properly address that Thanksgiving with his mother, though. I noticed that, and let it sit, the way you let things sit when demanding a reckoning feels like more effort than it's worth. We saw Diane at holidays, cordial on autopilot. She sent Josie a birthday card every year, $20 folded inside, never one for me. I stopped noticing that particular absence after a while. Grief goes quiet if you stop feeding it daily. I don't think I forgave her, not exactly. I think what actually happened is smaller than forgiveness. I just got busy living a life that didn't require her opinion of me to function. My students needed me. Josie needed me. Danny, imperfectly, needed me. Her verdict from that table kept existing somewhere in the back of my mind, but it stopped being load-bearing. I built a life on top of it instead of around it. I had no idea, buying a $2 scratch-off because I'd had a long day and it was sitting right there by the register, that I was about to find out exactly how load-bearing it still was for her. Quick pause here, because before I tell you what I actually did about that pie going stale on my counter, and before I tell you about the dinner Diane planned 3 weeks later, a dinner she thought she was hosting, I want to know if you're still with me. If someone ever decided your worth for you and quietly recalculated it the second your circumstances changed, click that comment box and type, "Still here," so I know you're with me all the way to the end. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button now, because the next 15 minutes are the part people tell me they remember for years. Okay, back to the kitchen table. Here's what I did with that pie, going stale under its foil lid. I called Danny at the store and asked him to come home for lunch, which never does. And when he sat across from me at that same kitchen table, I asked one question. How bad is it actually? Not what your mother told me. The real number. It took him a minute, because I don't think anyone had asked him that plainly either. The letter was real. $68,000 behind in a renovation loan Diane took out 4 years earlier, the same year. It noted quietly that Kayla and Brett's wedding reception was held under a specially built white tent in the Whitfields' own backyard, catered by Somion, who drove in from Indianapolis. Danny didn't connect those two facts out loud. I didn't need him to. I've spent 14 years watching people's choices show up later as consequences. The store hadn't failed from bad luck. It fell behind because Diane had turned down, twice, a merger offer from a hardware co-op that would have modernized and protected the place, because, in her words to Danny at the time, Whitfields don't need anyone's help running a Whitfield store. Pride is expensive. She'd spend on the appearance of doing well instead of the mechanics of it, right up until the appearance and the reality came due the same year. I called Curtis that week, not about the lottery this time, about the store. He connected me with a business attorney in Indianapolis named Priya Nair, who does exactly this. Family business is in trouble. "You can rescue the money," she told me on our second call, "or you can rescue the business." Those are different projects. Only one of them fixes anything twice. I thought about Roy in that parking lot years ago, telling me I'd never been worthless. I thought about the version of this where I simply wrote a check because it was easier, because it would make Diane stop calling, because some tired part of me still wanted her approval more than I wanted to admit. I didn't want to rescue Diane. I wanted to rescue the store Roy built, that Danny actually loved, where Josie has a wooden stool behind the counter with her name taped to it. Those turned out to be two different things, and only one of them was mine to give. I told Danny everything, including the part where his mother would end up with less control than she'd had in 40 years. He sat with it a long minute. Good, he finally said. She's earned less control. Ishel V. said that a long time ago. 3 weeks after the pie went stale, Diane called Danny to say she was hosting a dinner at the church hall. A rededication. She called it 62 years of Whitfield and Sons. And wasn't the timing wonderful, with everything happening in the family? She wanted everyone there. She wanted me, Danny said carefully, to stand up and say something. I told him I'd be there. I did not tell him what I was planning to say. In the 10 days before that dinner, Fairhaven did what Fairhaven does. Diane posted in the church community page, the one for prayer requests and casserole sign-ups, something worded to mean nothing and everything at once. Praying for unity as we celebrate everything this family has built. Sometimes those we've given the most to have the hardest time giving back. God sees it all. No names. She didn't need any. Fairhaven has about 4,000 people and maybe 4 degrees of separation. By Wednesday, Renee texted me a screenshot with 3 question marks. By Thursday, a woman I barely knew stopped me outside the post office told me she'd be praying for my heart to soften. My heart. Like I was Theon who'd stood at a dinner table and told a room I loved that someone was worthless. Kayla called Friday night. I almost didn't answer. She didn't ask for money, which surprised me. She talked around it a while, then got quiet. I knew what Mom said to you that Thanksgiving was wrong. I've known it for years. She's never once called me worthless. It's easier to stay quiet about a fire that's not burning your house. I told her I appreciated the call. I meant it mostly. Not an apology, more a confession. But in this family, a quiet confession was starting to feel like the most honest thing anyone had to offer me. I didn't respond to Diane's post. I had the recording sitting right there on my phone. And for 10 minutes on Wednesday night, I genuinely considered posting the audio itself, letting 4,000 people hear what unity had sounded like in that dining room. I didn't. Not because I'd forgiven her. Because a fight conducted in a comment section is a fight you can only ever tie, and I didn't want to tie. I wanted the truth said once, clearly, in a room she couldn't control, and then I wanted Tobe done saying it forever. Saturday evening I picked out something plain and good, the way you dress for church, and drove to the fellowship hall with Danny beside me and Josie's booster seat empty in the back, because some things a 7-year-old doesn't need to sit through. The fellowship hall was done up the way Diane does things that matter to her. Folding tables end to end, a banner reading 62 years of Whitfield and Sons over the little stage, the good coffee urn instead of the regular one. Roy sat near the front in a tie I hadn't seen since Josie's baptism. Kayla and Brett a few seats down. Half the congregation had turned out, plus faces from the store, the diner, 14 years of fronting into people at the grocery store. Diane worked the room in navy, greeting people with both hands, glowing the way she does when a room is arranged exactly the way she wants it. I found a seat near the middle, not hidden, not performing anything either. Danny sat beside me, his knee against mine under the table, the whole time. He hadn't done that at the Thanksgiving table 2 years ago, not in the way that counts. He did it now. Diane stood when the coffee had gone around, tapped her glass, and the room quieted the way it does for her. She talked about Roy, about 1962, about droughts in business the same way farmers talk about droughts in weather. She's always been good at this. Then, exactly as I knew she would, she turned slow and sorrowful until the whole room turned with her. I don't like doing this here, she said, in the voice she uses for things she's planned for 2 weeks. But this family believes in being honest in front of the people who matter. Grace has had wonderful news lately, and I know in my heart she remembers what this family means to her. A time pause. $68,000 would save 62 years of this town's history. I'm asking her, in front of everyone who loves the store, to remember what family means. She sat back down like she'd already won. Half the room was nodding before she'd finished. I stood up, not fast, not defensive, just a woman getting to her feet in a warm room that smelled like coffee and folding chairs. "You're right that I remember what this family stood for," I said, steadier than I expected. "I remember exactly. I have it recorded, actually, if anyone would like to hear it. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago this month. Should I play it, Diane, or would you rather tell everyone yourself what you told me at your own table?" The room didn't move. Diane's face did something complicated. Fury and the particular fear of a woman remembering a room can hold more than one history about her. "That's not what tonight is about," she said, quieter than before. "No," I agreed. "Tonight's about the store. So let's talk about the store, because I don't think most people here know what I know." I hadn't brought a folder, no stack of receipts. I didn't need one. It spent 2 weeks learning the actual shape of this problem instead of the shape Diane handed me at my own kitchen table, and I said it plainly, without cruelty, the way I tell a parent a hard fact at a conference. The merger offer turned down twice. A wedding tent that cost more than most people in that room made in 3 months, paid the same year the loan started falling behind. I never raised my voice. I watched faces change anyway, the way faces do when a story they'd already decided starts quietly coming apart. "I'm not going to pretend the store doesn't matter to me," I said. "It does. Roy built something real. Danny loves it. And my daughter has a stool behind that counter with her name taped on it. So here's what I'm actually offering, and I want everyone here to hear it, because I'm not interested in this becoming a story anyone gets to tell wrong later." I looked at Diane. Not unkindly. "I'll invest in Whitfield and Sons. All $68,000, plus enough to modernize the inventory system Danny's been asking for since before I ever won anything. But it comes with terms, same as any investment would from anyone. I get an ownership stake. Danny runs daily operations, with real authority, not the appearance of it. And decisions about this store's future get made by the people actually keeping its books, not by pride." I didn't say Diane's name at the end of that sentence. I didn't have to. Kayla spoke up, quiet, surprising me. "I think that's fair, Mom." It was the loudest thing anyone said all night, coming from her. Diane stood very still, reaching for the old authority that had run rooms for 40 years and finding, maybe for the first time in her life, the room wasn't handing it back automatically. "So you're saying no," she said finally, small, and I understood she genuinely believed there were only 2 options, total surrender or total refusal. She'd never once considered a third thing. "Terms." "No," I said. "I'm saying yes. Just not the version where I hand a woman who called me worthless a check and a smile in front of her whole church and let her tell that story her way forever. I already paid that bill once, 2 years ago, at your dining room table. I'm not paying it was." Diane didn't argue in front of that room. I think for the first time in a long time she understood the room wasn't fully hers to argue in front of anymore. She sat back down. Somebody refilled the coffee urn. The evening finished the way small-town evenings do, people drifting tater cars saying goodnight like nothing unusual happened, which is its own kind of mercy. The paperwork took 6 more weeks, Priya's doing, careful and unglamorous. I own 18% of Whitfield and Sons now. Danny runs it, with a title and a salary and for the first time, a real say in decisions that used to belong entirely to his mother. Roy still comes in most mornings for coffee with Hal, technically retired, visibly relieved. Diane kept a role too on paper. Founder emeritus. She still walks through twice a week. She stopped, as far as I can tell, making the decisions. She never apologized to me outright. I want to be honest about that, because a version where she cried and we hugged it out would be a nicer story and a less true one. What actually happened was smaller. 2 months after that dinner, a birthday card showed up in my mailbox. My birthday, not Josie's. First one in 9 years. No note, just her signature, and a 20 folded exactly the way she's always folded Theon's she sends Josie. I didn't cash it. I put it in a drawer, the way you keep a thing you're not sure yet what to do with. Kayla and I talk more now, small things mostly. She told me once, almost surprised by her own sentence, that she'd started noticing how her mother talks to other people, now that she'd watched it happen to somebody else out loud in a full room. I don't know if that's growth or just a woman waking up slowly. I've decided it doesn't fully matter which. Either way, she's paying attention now, and she wasn't before. A few weeks ago, Josie came home from 2nd grade with her face doing the thing kids' faces do when they're trying hard not to cry in front of you. A boy in her class had told her that her drawing of our dog looked worthless. That exact word, the way 7-year-olds pick up words they've heard grown-ups use and swing them around without knowing the weight yet. I sat with her at our kitchen table, the same one Diane sat at with her pie, the same one where I asked Danny how bad it really was, and I didn't tell her the word didn't matter, because it did, right then, the exact way it mattered to me 2 Novembers ago in a dining room I used to think of as safe. I told her something else instead. That people who need to make you feel small usually do it because something in their own life feels too big to hold, and that's true and sad and still isn't hers to carry. That being called something doesn't make it true, it just makes it sad, and the difference is the whole thing. That she gets to decide, over and over, for the rest of her life, what she actually is, no matter how many people try to hand her a different answer. She stopped doing the not crying face, and asked if we could hang the dog drawing on the refrigerator anyway, right in the middle, where everyone would see it first. We did. It's still there. I think about that Thanksgiving less than I expected to. Not because $12 million fixed something in me, because it didn't. That's not what money is for. I think about it less because I finally understand something I didn't at that table 2 years ago. Diane never had the authority to decide what I was worth. She only ever had the volume. Those aren't the same thing at all. They never were, not for one single day. That's the whole of it. A pie that went stale on my counter, a recording I never wanted to need, and a store finally run by the people who actually love it instead of the person most afraid of losing it. If someone spent years deciding you were worthless and only came back once the number attached to your name changed, would you let them back into your life at all? And on what terms, exactly? Type your answer in the comments and tell me where you're watching from while you're there. If this one held you the full 30 minutes, click that subscribe button. It genuinely helps a small channel more than you'd think, and I've got another one waiting for you next week. I'll see you in the next story.